Today I've got another to-be list, but this one features some of the most f***ed up sci-fi movies currently included with Tubi, starting with my bottom pick, Brain Damage. From the director of Frankenhooker, released in 1988, Brain Damage is the story of a young man who wakes up one morning to find an alien parasite attached to his brainstem. Now, as horrifying as it may sound, this movie is actually fairly silly. In fact, the parasite kind of becomes his buddy, his pal, his closest friend that gives him this constant state of euphoria that he obviously becomes addicted to, yet this parasite needs something in return. Now, you end up with just a campy, fun movie with some gross out moments in it, but conceptually, I feel like Brain Damage could easily be adapted into a terrifying horror movie. The idea alone is frightening, and there's a lot more that could be done with it, but if you're someone who enjoys silly horror movies and, goofy little practical effects, Brain Damage is loaded with that stuff, and this director has a much more twisted movie in a similar genre featured higher up on this list. Now, the newest Nicolas Cage movie to release is titled The Surfer. It's not featured on this list, and honestly, I didn't even particularly like it. It kind of lost me about halfway through, even though I'm a huge Nicolas Cage fan. That said, though, the director of The Surfer, their previous film, Vivarium, is also a wild one, and it made a lot more sense to me. In this movie, Jesse Eisenberg and Imogen Poots are checking out a new house in this new housing development. It's not quite to their liking, and when they decide to leave, they realize they can't leave. They become trapped in this desolate, almost Tim Burton-esque suburban nightmare. Yes, they're quite literally trapped. All of their attempts completely fail, so they decide to stick it out and see what happens, and they end up living in this house together. And then one day, again, this is fairly early on in the movie, and all of this is revealed to you in the trailer, something shows up on their doorstep. Something that they have to take care of. You'll notice I did not say a child. There's a reason for that. Now, while this is an interesting one, it's weird, it's dark, and there is one element in particular to Vivarium that is particularly grating, but if you feel like you can tough your way through all that, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on here. Much more so than there was in The Surfer. Now, as I said, Frank Henenlotter, who directed Brain Damage, he's got a wild one he did about 6 years prior to that, titled Basket Case.
What's in the basket?
Nothing? Now, this falls into the exact same genre, so I'll actually be brief here. These two movies would make a killer double feature. Basket Case is a bit more gruesome. You follow a real goofball of a main character. Again, this is a movie you can have a lot of fun watching if you get into it in the right way. Anyway, you follow this goofball character striking it out on his own in New York City. He's carrying around this basket everywhere he goes. Obviously, there's something horrifying in the basket. Wild moment after wild moment, goofy special effects, goofier premise, and a somehow even wilder delivery. It is a cult classic for a reason, whereas Brain Damage, it's kind of been forgotten. Now, while everything on this list is not a horror movie, there are some more. Those are the only two really silly ones on this list, though. And I'll tell you, though, both of them are still totally f***ed up. Another one that's a lot of fun, though, is Death Race 2000. This one has a real messed up plot. It revolves around a cross-country race, which is interesting enough. It's in the future, even more interesting, but these racers don't just get points for getting ahead of each other. They actually rack up points based on how many people they kill along the way. Now, this one itself is not too gruesome or off-putting. It's more the concept here. You wouldn't quite call this a horror movie, but it's a fun, wild science fiction action flick. You also get a tiny little role from a very young Sylvester Stallone in this movie.
You got 2 seconds to live.
David Carradine probably playing his best bad guy prior to Kill Bill.
Only the winner of the race is to shake hands with Mr. President.
Is that a grenade?
A hand grenade.
My number 6 pick is a deep space horror movie akin to things like Alien, and weirdly enough, it's a movie we saw in the theater right before I proposed to my wife. That's a story for another day. But Pandorum holds up as a space horror flick. The movie opens up with Ben Foster, one of my all-time favorite actors, trapped on this dark spaceship, this enormous ship. There's nobody around, all the lights are off, and he's just woke up out of a space coma, and he's got to figure out what's going on. Now, He quickly learns he's not alone. There's something else on the ship, runs into a couple other people. Again, this is a city-sized spaceship. So Pandorum starts off with a pretty good mystery. A mystery that builds and builds, and then when you realize what's actually on this ship with him, it turns into a full-on action, horror, sci-fi flick that is just totally bananas. It's pretty unhinged at times, but also has an interesting core story. Now, in terms of this genre, I mean, Alien really is the best of the best, but Pandorum, while it's not really as good as some of the best Alien movies, it falls into a similar wheelhouse and I think has been criminally forgotten with time. By the way, if you do like this resilient Alien shirt, you can only get it at darrenvandam.com/shop, along with all these other designs. My wife and I work on these together. We have a lot of fun doing it. And the shirts we picked out are Bella and Canvas shirts. They are ridiculously soft. They are a fitted style, which I prefer. So if you like your shirts to be a bit bigger, I recommend going a size up. It's a fantastic way to help support this YouTube channel while also showing off your great taste in movies. Now, my number 5 pick is a Stephen King adaptation that was not well reviewed when it came out. In fact, this movie's a bit over long and has its weak points, but because it was discarded by audiences and critics alike, I think Dreamcatcher has also become criminally underrated. In fact, the way the aliens invade in Dreamcatcher, I think, is not only interesting, but it's so different from any other alien invasion movie. There's also these really deep psychological elements with Dreamcatcher, almost an Inception level concept that honestly muddies up the movie quite a bit. I think that's why it's overlong. There's also a Donnie Wahlberg performance that's not particularly good in this movie, so it has its flaws, but I think some of the better elements of Dreamcatcher outweigh those. You get a great role from Morgan Freeman. I do think you have to be a bit forgiving to thoroughly enjoy Dreamcatcher, but if you go into it with the right mindset, it's a killer flick. Now, I'll go ahead and admit, my number 4 pick is the least twisted out of anything on this list. I still highly recommend it. It also features the largest cast on this list, or at least the most famous, and it's based on a book from writer Michael Crichton, Sphere. Now, I read this book back when it came out because I was such a nut for Jurassic Park when I was like 13 still. I wanted to read the latest Michael Crichton book and was just blown away by it. Now, the movie doesn't quite deliver on everything the book gives you. It's much shorter, but the core concept here I think is excellent and really could have been expanded upon. But the core concept here is that a giant space shuttle is discovered at the bottom of the ocean, and when scientists go to investigate it, they discover this seemingly magical sphere inside of this spacecraft. It's not apparent to them right away that this sphere is almost all-powerful, but the sphere does something very interesting and unique psychologically. So this is a clever movie with a really interesting core concept. It does play it a bit safe. It's PG-13. Again, you got a lot of big actors in it. But if you're watching this list because you want something a bit thought-provoking, more thought-provoking than Basket Case or Brain Damage, but maybe less weird than Vivarium, Sphere is going to be a great option for you. But we'll go from the safest pick on this list to probably the most f***ed up thing on this list, again, conceptually, with the cult classic, A Boy and His Dog.
I'm hungry. I can't do good work when I'm hungry.
Find me abroad and we'll go to the promised land.
That's what you always say.
This is a cult classic post-apocalyptic flick starring a very young Don Johnson and his dog. A talking dog, mind you, or at least there's some form of telepathy working here. Now, obviously, most post-apocalyptic movies have their own twisted things going on in them. A Boy and His Dog is a special one, though. This dog is able to help this young boy hunt down women, primarily for the purposes of pleasure, mind you. So it starts off on kind of a twisted tip.
Hell, they didn't have to cut her. She could have been used 2 or 3 more times.
And then Don Johnson discovers an underground society, and things manage to get so much wilder than that. This is one of those little classic gems people either seem to remember and should go back and revisit just because of how wild it is. On the other hand, you've got folks that have never heard of this movie that should probably pursue it just to get eyes on some of the wild stuff available out there. It also happens to be, like I said, a cult classic. There's a lot of enjoyable elements here, but a lot of them revolve around just kind of how weird and wild this movie actually becomes.
A film that has become a legend by word of mouth. Rated R.
But my number 2 pick was a cutting-edge film when it was released. Less impressive today than it was back then, but still features a killer story with A Scanner Darkly. This is from director Richard Linklater, who's always doing something new and different. Even though he's probably most famous for Dazed and Confused, he is often pursuing something new and cutting edge in the film industry, and A Scanner Darkly was definitely one of those things. This is also based on a book by Philip K. Dick and has very interesting science fiction elements that honestly will lose you if you do not keep up with this movie. There's not much hand-holding going on with this film, and the animation style can be kind of distracting because of how cool it is. What they did, if you can't tell, they actually filmed this entire movie and then went back almost like a filter and added this animation style. Now, that was much more labor-intensive back when this came out, which is why it's probably less impressive today. But again, I'm telling you, the core story here is way more thought-provoking than anything else on this list, including my number 1 pick, which is also a cult classic, also very thought-provoking, and even though it predates The Matrix, Dark City has some serious Matrix vibes. This is actually from the director of The Crow, and it was his follow-up to The Crow, and I almost hesitate to tell you that because this movie exceeds The Crow in almost every way imaginable. Dark City has this dark neo-noir vibe. It actually starts off as a mystery movie with little clues and hints and some dark, twisted elements that I will admit are not too off-putting for most audiences. It's grim though. And then as the mystery deepens, things just get more and more bizarre in Dark City. It becomes more of a dark fantasy story, almost not quite science fiction, or at least it doesn't have a science fiction feel for most of the story here. I'll also say this is probably one of Jennifer Connelly's more underrated movies. She's in a ton of great stuff, and you almost forget she's in this one. Being my number 1 pick, it might actually be one of the most well-known movies on this list, but if you have somehow never seen Dark City, make sure it's the first one you watch off of this list. I'm telling you, if you clicked on this one wanting to watch some twisted science fiction, Dark City is going to scratch every itch you can imagine. But here's a quick recap of the list. Hopefully you found something really good to watch. If you did, leave me a like. It helps out the channel more than you would think, and so does subscribing. But I'll keep making these videos as long as y'all keep watching them. Thanks for checking out this Tubi episode, and you will see me on the next one.